The fact is that the Palestinians have lived under occupation, and Gaza
They're not under occupation. They have their own state.
That's nonsense.
Is a state,
that's nonsense.
and it is run by Hamas, and they had one election, which, as Trevor said, the people voted for Hamas. Hamas then killed the opposition, and they've never had an election since.
Douglas Murray believes that the root cause of the conflict is Hamas. Hamas is a militant group ruling Gaza. Murray argues that Hamas uses civilians as human shields. He claims Israel is doing everything it can to avoid civilian casualties. Murray criticises the international community. He says they are not doing enough to stop Hamas. He also criticised them for pressuring Israel to make concessions. Murray believes lasting peace can only be achieved if Hamas is removed from power.
I'm not giving anything away. I mean, it's a topic that's incredibly important, because just look at the way in which this word Zionist is now thrown around. I mean, the disgust with which it's thrown around, the way in which this word that describes this noble and wonderful concept of Jewish statehood is being used as a slur. And, you know, as I say, once again, and I've seen it myself, saw it recently in Australia, in Melbourne and Sydney, you had protesters screaming about Zionists. Zionists, do they know what they're talking about? I don't think so. So I do want to set the record straight on some of that. I think that this is an extraordinary moment where there should be a moment of clarity in the West about this. And instead, I think that we're seeing an explosion of bigotry. And I'm looking forward to getting into the weeds in Toronto on Monday. So I think it's sold out, but anyone who wants to come to Roy Thompson Hall, perhaps they can bribe their way to get a ticket. I don't know.
Well, I pity whoever is facing you in this debate. You're not a man I would want to be having a all-out debate on, particularly on an issue like this, because I know you're passionate about it. And the debate is timely because we now have people marching in America and elsewhere in the West calling on Hezbollah to murder Zionists. And there's, it's just disturbing footage. Let's have a quick look. And I also want to get your reaction, Douglas, to what we've seen unfold after the rescue of those 4 hostages. So much criticism of Israel's tactics and the alleged collateral damage from the rescue mission. Was there another way for Israel to rescue its people? Should they have issued a warning, as the BBC suggested, before launching the mission?
It's amazing. First of all, on the Hezbollah people, just notice again, like the KKK, these people don't have the confidence to show their faces. Isn't it interesting that they're calling for support for a genocidal terrorist organization, but weirdly they cover their faces? Maybe they're not so sure of their views. Maybe they're not so proud of them. Maybe they know that Mummy wouldn't be so proud of them. Who knows? As for the sort of the raid this week, much of the media reported it as the release of 4 Israeli hostages. They weren't brave Israelis who are superbly trained went in and freed and rescued these poor 3 men and 1 woman. And the reporting on this has been absolutely despicable. You mentioned the BBC journalist who asked an Israeli official why they didn't give an advance warning of the raid in Gaza.
Rushanara Ali has a different viewpoint. She believes that Israel is occupying Palestinian territory. Ali argues that this occupation is the root cause of the conflict. She says Israel uses excessive force against Palestinians. Ali claims this is causing a humanitarian crisis. She criticizes Israel for not negotiating a peace deal with the Palestinians. Ali believes the international community needs to put more pressure on Israel. She argues that Israel should end its occupation and agree to a 2-state solution.
Is likely to end is if our government continues the pressure on the US and also the Arab countries play their part in applying pressure on Hamas. It's the pressure on the Israeli government and Hamas that is going to bring an end to this war. If, in the absence of exerted pressure by the US on the Israeli government and the others, can the minister, who has got a very good track record on campaigning against genocide, certainly with me in relation to the case of the Gambia and Myanmar, look at how that case can be used to apply pressure on genocide prevention, which is the point of that ICJ case, to prevent the Israeli government from indiscriminate attacks on civilians?
The debate covers a wide range of topics. These include the history of the conflict, the role of Hamas, the Israeli occupation, and the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Both Murray and Ali make passionate arguments for their viewpoints. Douglas Murray argues that Hamas is a terrorist organisation. He says Hamas is responsible for the deaths of many civilians. Murray cites the fact that Hamas has fired thousands of rockets into Israel. He notes that these rockets have killed civilians.
Hamas started a war, and there's consequences for starting a war, in my view. And there is no law of war or nature that says you can start a war, massacre innocent civilians in their homes, kill young people at a rave, and then the moment you start to lose the war that results, say, actually, look, let's hang off, guys, let's call it a draw. No such thing.
He went on to emphasize the consequences of Hamas's actions must be the total eradication of the terrorist group.
And actually, as one of the members of the war cabinet in Israel the other day said, Benny Gantz, there is no point in putting out 3/4 of a fire. You either put the fire out or you don't. You don't put out a bit of the fire and then leave it burning. Extinguish the whole thing, or there's no point. And in the case of Gaza, extinguishing the whole thing is destroying Hamas completely, making sure they are never again operationally capable.
Rushanara Ali argues that Israel uses disproportionate force against Palestinians. She claims this causes a humanitarian crisis. Ali cites the fact that many Palestinian civilians have been killed and injured in Israeli attacks. Douglas Murray argues that the international community is not doing enough to stop Hamas. He criticises the United Nations. Murray says the UN is not taking stronger action against Hamas. He claims the UN, it allows Hamas to continue operating.
Many people are saying to Israel, you can't beat Hamas. You've set this goal, and I'm sure maybe you discussed it with the Prime Minister today, you've set this goal of completely defeating Hamas, but you can't defeat Hamas because it's an ideology. What's your response to that?
Well, they often say it's an idea. That's another one, ideology or an idea. Well, there's several things about that. The first thing is, I've heard that said a lot in campaigns against terrorist groups and others. There's always the claim, for instance, that if you fight the terrorist group, you will create more terrorists, which is a logical cycle that does not work, because, of course, that means that you should simply never fight terrorism, because if you do, you'll create terrorists, which means you just sort of have to stand back and take it, which doesn't seem to me viable. The second thing about this is that it's just not true that you can't defeat a terrorist group. You can defeat the leaders, certainly. You can kill or capture the leaders. That's eminently possible. I think I talked about this with the Prime Minister earlier a bit. I think there is a complexity at the moment of having the mission of simultaneously destroying Hamas and also having to negotiate with Hamas. I think that is a very tricky juncture. But, I mean, lots of ideas have been destroyed. I mean, Nazism was destroyed. Communism, although it lingers again on American college campuses primarily, but it lingers, but it was pretty much destroyed in 1989, 1990. There are residue countries like North Korea still vaguely trying versions of it, but it was destroyed. And it was partly also, of course, destroyed on the battlefield of ideas, which is one of the reasons why it gives me great... some people say, well, there are so many lies in the world, so many liars, so many horrible things being said by horrible people, and how can you possibly intend to pierce through them? And I always say that that history is just filled with people who destroyed bad ideas, and the way in which communism was brought down is a very good example. When Alexander Solzhenitsyn was writing, could he have imagined the impact it had? The vast crack on the Iron Curtain, the wall that was caused by his work. When Václav Havel was writing and working, he helped destroy this horrible idea. And communism was much, much more widespread than Hamas. So when people say it's not possible, I think...
Rushanara Ali argues that the international community needs to put more pressure on Israel. She believes this pressure should aim to end the occupation. Ali argues that Israel should agree to a two-state solution. She believes this is the only way to achieve lasting peace in the region. The debate provides a comprehensive overview of the Israel-Palestine conflict. It showcases the differing perspectives on the issue. It highlights the passionate arguments from both sides. The debate is an important discussion on a complex and ongoing conflict. Douglas Murray's viewpoint centres on Hamas. He believes Hamas is the main obstacle to peace. Murray argues that Hamas uses civilians as human shields. He claims Israel tries to avoid civilian casualties. Murray criticises the international community for not doing enough to stop Hamas. He believes the international community unfairly pressures Israel to make concessions. Murray's solution is clear. He believes lasting peace can only come if Hamas is removed from power.
Sky News All-Star Douglas Murray has been a vocal critic of Hamas since the terror group launched their assault on Israel on October 7th last year. The outspoken commentator has continued his tirade into the new year, publicly blasting individuals and organisations who he sees as supporting Hamas. Conservative commentator Douglas Murray has consistently slammed Hamas and supporters of Palestine since the war broke out on October 7th, 2023. Mr. Murray has made a point of highlighting the radical aspects of Hamas and how this terror organisation is different to anything we've ever experienced.
Hamas targeted innocent civilians in Israel on October the 7th. And it's a pretty unique terror organization, Hamas, or an unusual one, because yes, it then wishes to use any innocent civilians in Gaza as collateral to their, or indeed the main attack point for their war. No other, I can't think of an army that has behaved like this in history, which is one of the reasons why Hamas is not an army. It's a terror group. It literally puts civilians in front of its own terrorists. It literally puts civilian buildings above its own terrorist infrastructure, its weapons storage units, its missile storage, and indeed its leaders. This is a sort of cowardly way in which Hamas acts.
Douglas Murray has also engaged in many heated arguments with commentators who push a pro-Palestine agenda.
First of all, your other guest, I don't know what kind of a creature he is. He's a kind of low-grade thug as far as I can see. He's listened to nothing I've said.
Yeah, I know, because I'm Muslim. That's what we call all Muslims.
I'll tell you. No, it's not that at all. It's not that at all. I just think that you're just a very low-rent racist. But anyway, let me just get on to it. You say first of all, I don't care about the death of Palestinian children. Yes, I do care. I care very deeply about it. But I also know that the responsibility for their deaths lies on Hamas, which has misgoverned their society for the last 16 years and now has been leading the country into being in a war with Israel. So yes, it's on Hamas this.
Douglas Murray vehemently denies Palestinians are victims of genocide, slamming anyone who pushes this idea.
Well, anyone who uses the term genocide in this context simply doesn't know what they're talking about, or is a malevolent actor. I don't know if Mr. Week has travelled at all in his life, how far he's travelled, how many conflicts he's seen, but I'd have guessed none. and you clearly know nothing about this particular conflict, and you've obviously seen none of it.
He doubles down on his support for Israel, saying the IDF do everything in their power to avoid civilian casualties.
My counterpart here goes on about the deliberate genocide of children and women. I mean, I know, and this is the sort of thing I think you do. You sort of claim that there are bombs being deliberately dropped on children and old women. Why would Israel want to drop bombs deliberately on children or old women? I mean, it's just a shame you don't get out and see anything.
Rushanara Ali's viewpoint focuses on the Israeli occupation. She believes this is the root cause of the conflict. Ali argues that Israel uses excessive force against Palestinians. She claims this creates a humanitarian crisis. Ali criticizes Israel for not negotiating with the Palestinians. She believes the international community needs to put more pressure on Israel. Ali argues for an end to the occupation and a two-state solution. The debate between Murray and Ali covers the history of the conflict. It discusses the role of Hamas and the Israeli occupation. It highlights the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Both Murray and Ali present their arguments passionately.
All of the communities of this country, in this diverse country, should be the one community expected to accept with equanimity those who cheer on the murder of Jews and those who support the murder of Jews. It is not acceptable that the Jewish community should be the only community in this land that is expected to put up with murder and then being scorned for their fellow Jews being murdered. No other community would accept this, and I beg you not to accept it either. I beg you not to accept it. I came back to London the other night and I hear the residue of the people outside the Israeli embassy. These people were not protesting against Israeli countermeasures. They hadn't even had any countermeasures. They were protesting because Jews by the hundreds had been slaughtered in Israel and they wanted to wound us more. Well, they might try, but we should not accept that with equanimity. I've written in The Spectator tomorrow a demand on the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary that supporters of Hamas in the UK must be treated in exactly the same way as supporters of ISIS were. Some people thought that the claim that Hamas was ISIS was a rhetorical claim. We know since Saturday, if we didn't know before, it is not rhetoric, it is real. If you stand in Britain with a Hamas flag, you should not be allowed to be free in Britain. You should be arrested, have your citizenship withdrawn, your passport withdrawn. You should be deported. You should be sent to the Gaza and try your luck there. But you should not be given the right to insult and to taunt Jews after the death of Jews. It's intolerable and we should not tolerate it. Let me say one more thing, and it's the main thing I wanted to say to you tonight. That you're not alone. That you're not alone. The saddest thing I've heard in recent days have been the number of Jewish friends of mine who've said, in Israel and outside of Israel,
Murray argues that Hamas is a terrorist organisation. He says Hamas has killed many civilians. Murray cites the thousands of rockets Hamas has fired into Israel. He notes the civilian casualties caused by these rockets. Ali argues that Israel uses disproportionate force. She claims this force causes a humanitarian crisis. Ali cites the many Palestinian civilians killed and injured by Israeli attacks. Murray criticises the international community's response to Hamas. He argues the UN is not taking strong enough action against Hamas. Murray claims the UN allows Hamas to continue operating. Ali argues the international community needs to pressure Israel. She believes this pressure should aim to end the occupation. Ali argues for a two-state solution. She believes this is the path to lasting peace. The debate is comprehensive. It provides a detailed look at the Israel-Palestine conflict. It highlights the differing perspectives of Murray and Ali. It shows the passionate arguments from both sides. The debate is an important discussion on a complex issue. Douglas Murray focuses on Hamas. He believes Hamas is the main cause of the conflict. Murray argues Hamas uses civilians as human shields. He claims Israel tries to avoid civilian casualties. Murray criticizes the international community's response. He believes they do not do enough to stop Hamas. Murray also criticized the pressure on Israel to make concessions. He believes peace can only come if Hamas is removed from power. Rushanara Ali focuses on the Israeli occupation. She believes this is the root cause of the conflict. Ali argues Israel uses excessive force against Palestinians. She claims this causes a humanitarian crisis. Ali criticizes Israel for not negotiating a peace deal. She believes the international community needs to pressure Israel. Ali argues for an end to the occupation and a two-state solution.
A deep commitment to a lasting settlement in the Middle East. For me, it's impossible without ending the blockade of Gaza. We need our government to fight for an end to the occupation, an end to illegal settlements. And in Gaza, 80% of civilians depend on international humanitarian relief.
That is why it's so important that our government listens to many in Parliament, but also across our country, who have in the past campaigned for the recognition of Palestinian statehood.
And according to Save the Children, a child is dying every 15 minutes inside Gaza. To bring a permanent ceasefire. That is what people need, of all backgrounds, of all communities. We need a peace-building process. We need our government to act. What is our government doing? What is the Secretary of State going to do to try and work with Arab states, the US, to apply pressure on the warring parties to bring an end to this war? How that case can be used to apply pressure on genocide prevention, which is the point of that ICJ case, to prevent the Israeli government from indiscriminate attacks on civilians. On suspected breaches of international law by Israel and the implications for UK policy, including relevant arms exports.
People should work together because what we all need to see is an end to this war, an end to the escalation in the region.
It feels like the minister's going backwards and his government has still failed to restore UNRWA funding, which is making the matter and the misery worse.
These include the history of the conflict, the role of Hamas, the Israeli occupation, and the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Both Murray and Ali present their arguments passionately. Murray argues that Hamas is a terrorist organisation. He says Hamas is responsible for many civilian deaths. Murray cites the thousands of rockets fired into Israel by Hamas. He notes the civilian casualties caused by these rockets. Ali argues that Israel uses disproportionate force. She claims this force causes a humanitarian crisis. Ali cites the many Palestinian civilians killed and injured in Israeli attacks. Murray criticizes the international community's response to Hamas. He argues the UN does not take strong enough action. Murray claims the UN allows Hamas to continue operating. Ali argues the international community needs to pressure Israel. She believes this pressure should aim to end the occupation. Ali argues for a two-state solution. She believes this is the path to lasting peace. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and for more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel.